The large intestine is shorter yet wider than the small intestine. It's just under about 5 feet long. Its major functions include what's called haustral churning, which is a muscular contraction moving material from pouch to pouch. We'll see in the picture coming up that the large intestine has kind of a pouch-like look to it, and these pouches are called haustra. So to move material, these haustra have smooth muscle that churn material and move it forward. So haustral churning, including peristalsis, drive the contents through the large intestine and eventually into the rectum. The large intestine is also a primary location that houses bacteria. These bacteria are part of that normal microbiota that helps with our digestive processes. Some of the microbial growth will help convert proteins into amino acids, so kind of complete some of our digestion. It'll break down some of these amino acids, and in the process, these bacteria produce a number of B vitamins and vitamin K. So we actually get a small amount of vitamins from the bacteria growing in our colon or large intestine. The large intestine doesn't produce any enzymes, but it does do some absorption, primarily water, electrolytes or ions, and some vitamins. Ultimately, by absorbing water, that material becomes what we call feces. And then finally, we have to empty the large intestine and rectum through a process called defecation. So looking at the large intestine, we can kind of follow the path of material from the ileum, which is the last part of the small intestine, to get from the ileum into what's called the cecum. There is a sphincter or a valve called the ileocecal sphincter. This sphincter, when relaxed, allows the material to enter the cecum. The cecum is the widest part of the large intestine. It's almost like a big pouch. Projecting off of the cecum, you can see the vermiform appendix. Vermiform just means it looks like a worm. As the smooth muscle contracts, this material will move from the cecum up the ascending colon, over into the transverse colon, where there's a bend or a flexure called the right colic or hepatic flexure, along the transverse colon towards the left side of the body, down the descending colon. There's another angle there called the left colic or splenic flexure. Down the descending colon into the sigmoid colon, and then finally stored in the rectum. You'll notice identified along the way are the haustra, the pouches of the large intestine. There's also a longitudinal muscle that runs the entire length of the large intestine called tenei coli muscle. And then finally, that material is stored inside the rectum. So here's the rectum. The rectum has stretch-sensitive neurons that are activated when material is in the rectum. This is going to initiate nerve impulses to notify you that it's time to use the restroom. This reflex will actually relax what's called the internal anal sphincter. And luckily, we have surrounding the internal anal sphincter an external anal sphincter. This is skeletal muscle, which is voluntarily controlled, whereas the internal anal sphincter is involuntary. Here's a review of digestive enzymes. Digestive enzymes are probably the area you'll spend the most time on because there's a number of enzymes along the GI tract. The most important things to remember about an enzyme is the source, or what organ or gland produces the enzyme, the enzyme's substrate, so what molecule does it digest, and then as a result of that digestion, what are the products? And we can simplify this a bit. Like I'm not going to hold you to all these different disaccharide and trisaccharide names, but you should know that when you have an amylase, it's going to digest polysaccharides into smaller carbohydrates, such as disaccharides or trisaccharides. So we have salivary amylase, produced by salivary glands, digesting carbohydrates primarily in your mouth. So we also should understand where these enzymes do their digestion. Recall that saliva also has a lipase, lingual lipase, which is going to digest triglycerides into fatty acids and maybe some diglycerides. But recall that this happens mostly in your stomach because lingual lipase prefers a lower pH than what is in your mouth. What enzymes does the stomach add in? Well, the stomach adds in an enzyme called pepsin. It actually starts as pepsinogen, but has to be converted into the active enzyme called pepsin. And that's our first protease, so it'll digest proteins down into smaller proteins called peptides. The stomach produces a lipase, so now we've got two lipases functioning in the stomach. The one from the stomach, gastric lipase, and the one coming in from saliva, the lingual lipase. The pancreas is going to add its enzymes. It adds in an amylase. It adds in some proteases, trypsin, chymotrypsin, elastase, and carboxypeptidase. These four all digest proteins into smaller proteins, such as peptides. The pancreas adds in its lipase, so here's our third lipase, pancreatic lipase. I'll remind you, all these pancreatic enzymes are functioning in the small intestine because pancreatic juice gets delivered into the small intestine. There are also the nucleases that digest RNA and DNA. Ribonuclease to digest RNA, deoxyribonuclease to digest DNA. And the result of RNA and DNA digestion are the nucleotides. Finally, we have the enzymes of the small intestine. So the small intestine produces a number of enzymes that kind of just finish off your enzymatic digestion. We have some disaccharides that need to be digested. So maltase digests maltose. Sucrase digests sucrose. And lactase digests lactose. That way we can get the disaccharides digested into monosaccharides. There's a couple of other peptidases. These enzymes digest the small little proteins, the peptides, down into amino acids so we can absorb the amino acids. So we have one called aminopeptidase and one called dipeptidase. Finally, a little bit about some of the disorders of the digestive system. We've probably heard of ulcers. Ulcers are little lesions in the lining of the stomach or even in the small intestine. These are typically found under situations where the person might be under stress. they could also have an infection that contributes to their ulcers. We used to think that ulcers were just related to stress, and that's not necessarily the case. A lot of individuals have a bacterial infection called Helicobacter pylori. And if you have this bacteria, you tend to have these ulcers form. And to treat this, we can give an antibiotic. Individuals also might develop ulcers from overuse of NSAIDs, which can kind of thin out the mucus of the stomach and leave that stomach leave that stomach kind of unprotected from its stomach acid. Or some people just overproduce hydrochloric acid. So it's the combination of the acids, the lack of maybe mucus, and an infection that can cause stomach ulcers. Diverticular disease is where the wall of the large intestine often will form these outpouches, these sac-like outpouchings of the GI tract. They can become weak and cause a lot of inflammation. Colorectal cancer is one of the top 3 deadliest cancers after lung and breast cancer. Some contributing factors include genetics, overuse of alcohol, high-fat diets, low dietary fiber are all linked to increasing risk of colon cancer. Hepatitis is inflammation of the liver. There's a number of things that can damage and harm your liver, including medications, drugs, other chemicals in our environment, and then there's a number of viruses that cause hepatitis. Hepatitis A is more of a poor water quality source, so this virus can be found in contaminated water, usually found in countries that don't have very good water quality. So individuals traveling to those countries could get a hepatitis A vaccine. There are a number of cases in our country. Sometimes a restaurant will be linked to a hepatitis A outbreak, but typically that hepatitis A is found in other countries. Hepatitis B, sexually transmitted, blood, IV drug users, and then hepatitis C, also IV drug users. This one has a closer link to cirrhosis of the liver and linked to liver cancer. Hepatitis B, we do have a vaccine for it. We do not have a vaccine for the hepatitis C virus. And then there's some other ones. There's a hepatitis D, and there's even a hepatitis E virus. But these are all viral infections of the liver.